Hi all, greetings from I am Indore. We'll just start in 2 minutes time. So we'll start now. Dear all, greetings from I am Indore. My name is Susant Misra and currently I am the Dean Research at I am Indore. I welcome you to the fifth lecture in the I am Indore COVID-19 webinar series. As you know, I am Indore is one of the finest business schools in this country. It is the second best school in India to receive the prestigious triple accreditation AACSB, IQUIS and AMBA. Today's lecture will be about 40 minutes, followed by question and answers. The webinar attempts to understand the relevance of China's emergence as a technology superpower. Let me introduce the speaker of the day. Dr. G. Venkatraman is the Associate Professor in the Humanities and Social Sciences area at IIM Indore. Professor Venkat did his PhD from the School of Government, Peking University, Beijing. He has also worked in Beijing as a professional nearly about 3 years. He is a sinologist and fluent in speaking Mandarin language. Professor Venkat offers courses like doing business with China, geopolitical perspectives in business, and business ethics at pedagogy at postgraduate level. He has been a visiting fellow at the BRICS Center, Fudan University, Shanghai, and visiting faculty at the ICN, Nancy, France. His areas of research are China's interface with global governance and business ethics pedagogy. With this short introduction, I welcome Professor Venkat to share his thoughts with us. Professor Venkat, all yours.
Thank you, Professor Sushant, for your very generous introduction. So without further ado, I'll just straight away start, discussing about today's topic, that is relevance of China's emergence as a tech superpower. We are in a this is a very interesting day. Actually, we are talking about it first because of the US presidential elections and the way China has become such an important factor in political mobilization there. Second is a very interesting development has taken place today in China. I mean 2 days back. Ant Financial, which was supposed to become, the most valued launch as far as IPO is concerned, in history, suddenly, the stock exchanges in Shanghai and Hong Kong, IPO has been postponed for now, and Jack Ma has been summoned to Beijing to basically be interrogated or whatever, I mean, by the authorities there. Interestingly, Jack Ma, some few days back, along with some other provincial authorities in Shanghai, was critical of, what was going on in the as far as the financial ecosystem in China is concerned. So pretty interesting developments, happening there. Now coming back to this topic, this is what I have organized my talk as. I'll be introducing, the topic for all of you. Second is, although the topic is emergence of China as a tech superpower, the people are still, various people are still debating, is China a tech superpower? So we need to just, slightly get a hang of this debate, whether it's a tech superpower or not. Then we go on to basically look at the role of the Chinese government. What are the various steps that the Chinese government has taken for emergence of China as a technological powerhouse. What are the various internal measures it has taken? What are the various external measures it has taken? And most importantly, what kind of impact it has on the globe in general and emerging markets like India. And then I would go on to conclude. So this is what is the structure. Now coming to the introduction. See, from 1978 to 2008, China has been mostly an importer of aircraft, PCs, and cars from United States and other developed markets. And mainly it was exporting T-shirts and shoes. But today, in a very quick time, it is exporting advanced 4G telecom equipment. It is a major, Huawei has emerged as an alternative source of coding on the basis of which 5G equipment and 5G technology is being built around. It is exporting video games. Recently, TikTok was banned in United States because of various fears regarding intrusion of privacy, stealing of data. It's also basically in a position to export electric cars. 89 unicorns today of China are worth $350 billion. And this is combined valuation of all the unicorns in United States. Government in China is a very, very significant player. And when we talk about innovation economy in China, we need to understand that unlike the Silicon Valley, where, liberalism, a liberal environment, a free environment has encouraged a certain kind of, innovation and free thinking. That is not there in China. Here, it's completely different model where state capitalism has played a very critical role in boosting innovation. And this kind of an innovation is completely different because in the Silicon Valley, a certain person innovates and then, he sees that whoever takes the innovative product or service, then it's up to the person or the business to develop it further and take it on, and then the innovator moves on. But in China, it's a brick and mortar kind of a model, unlike the Silicon Valley model, where the innovator actually builds a certain kind of value chain from the original product. So therefore, if you have a player like Meituan Tianping, which basically it started as a food delivery system, initially it was Meituan, but over a period of time, it also, took over Tianping. So Meituan Tianping is not, someone like Yelp, for example, an innovative product like Yelp, which only talks about restaurants. So it started for, in the area of food delivery, but then they went into mobiles, but then they went into something else. So therefore, there is a kind of a chain that is built, and you build a certain kind of ecosystem around your innovative product. So therefore, this is something which is completely unique. The world hasn't seen earlier, and therefore the relevance of this topic, and we all need to understand. In fact, the enormity of what is happening here can be can be estimated from the fact that William Barr, Attorney General of United States currently, he said that like China, how the state, business, and academia all come together, to develop a certain kind of innovation economy, we in the United States and our allies also need to do something similar, some kind of a state capitalism. So if it has prompted someone, a senior US official, to toe the Chinese line, you can imagine the enormity of the situation. So he was quoted as saying that, we need to decide on which horse we are going to ride in this race. So with these remarks, I would go on to, the next, top theme. Basically, the question is China a tech superpower? Well, there are answers, right answers and wrong answers here. So to begin with, yes, China is a tech superpower. It has what, Kai-Fu Lee, the famous computer scientist and writer, has said, it has a latecomer's advantage. What is this latecomer's advantage? He says that, today's world is, artificial intelligence is no more an age of discovery. In previous centuries, you were talking about discovering something and then building on the expertise, etc., etc. But if you talk of something like artificial intelligence, you are talking of an age of implementation where you don't need to be extremely bright, but you need to have a certain critical mass of AI scientists, a certain threshold that is to be reached. And after that, whoever is, if you are very good in implementing that, then you are in an advantage. So therefore, it's a late comers advantage. Uh, so therefore, this advantage is the this latecomers advantage in the age of implementation, which suits to build expertise in a field of AI. This is the one which has become the most complex issue that the world faces, and specifically that has been the main grouse of US against China, because many of the technological products that China has come up with invariably leads to getting access to lots and lots of data, and that kind of data actually helps China build on and hone its skills in sharpening its AI prowess. So China today, it has the biggest cluster of AI scientists. There are more than 800 million internet users. So that itself makes it a kind of a superpower. Chinese tech companies occupy a prominent position in global supply chains. So if you look at some of the major Chinese tech companies, especially in China in general and the Bay Area, the Pearl, Delta region, you see many of them, Guangzhou, Shenzhen, that part of the world. Many of these tech companies occupy very prominent positions in the global supply chains, and that they have an expertise to assemble anything and everything, and that makes them an inevitable player in the global supply chain. Now, the only hitch here is that the Chinese tech players, because if you look at someone like Facebook, Google, Amazon, they are kind of global players. But if you look, and so therefore they have diverse exposure. Whereas if you look at something like China, the BAT players, so for example, BAT is basically B for Baidu, A for uh, uh, Alibaba, and T for Tencent, and other players like that. If you look at the BAT tech players are in a danger that, because they are confined mostly to China, they have this trap of cutting themselves off from the wider world. And in the future, they may not be well equipped to deal with the ecosystem. Although one should take this argument with a pinch of salt, because if you survive in a very, very heterogeneous and cutthroat market like China, as someone said, succeed in China and succeed in the whole world. So that is there, but still, this might come as a disadvantage later. In a very short period of time, China has been able to poise itself as a successful exporter of indigenized high-speed trains and nuclear plants. And so therefore, one wonders that it's a matter of time before China is able to export some of its tech products and services. Now, coming to the other side of the debate, I already touched on one. Is China a tech superpower? No. That its dependence on imports of semiconductors. If you look at the top 15 semiconductor firms, there's not even a single Chinese name. If you look at 68% of market cap of world's top 70 digital platforms, they are all US companies, while China has nearly 22%. China's 5G technology edge, experts say, is short-lived, because this kind of a 5G technology which China has is, hardware-backed, technology, which, Huawei has mastered. This kind of a technology it's believed by experts that some major tech players in US and EU, for example, believe that they will be in a position few years from now to have a software motored 5G technology, and therefore players like Qualcomm in United States, they would be able to better give competition to China. So this is a debate that is there. Now, coming back to how has China emerged as a major innovation player? Now, to begin with, in the initial late 1990s, you will be surprised that there was hardly any innovation in the Chinese economy. I mean, and there were very few players who started, private players gradually started innovating. And where do they get the money from? Because private players, even today they struggle to get access to funding from the state banks. So therefore, the venture capitalists from US, mainly, they used to back certain private players for only those kind of innovative, only those kind of business models which were typically cut, copy and paste in China. But very soon it led to, within a decade or so, as the Chinese middle class became prosperous, they started going to different parts of the world for education, for tourism and all. And then they saw the world and then they got the exposure. They came back to their home and they said that, no, we don't want cut, copy, paste models. We want, those kind of products and services, which will solve our problems. So Chinese solutions for Chinese problems. That is what was basically the demand from the Chinese customers. And very soon that led to emergence of players like Alibaba. The story is pretty lengthy. We don't have much time, but to cut the story short, this kind of a demand spurred on some of the private players and innovative players like, Jack Ma and, others to come up with, typical, solutions for China. So for example, Jack Ma came with, the idea of Taobao. Taobao is basically the e-commerce, platform in China. He came up, so just like in India, when we started buying things from Amazon and Flipkart, and we were not very sure if we are ordering for something and we pay in advance, whether we are going to get the good product or service or not. So is the case with China also, because they are new to this world. But so therefore, Jack Ma came up with a system of escrow payment where, the payment is released to the seller only after the buyer, purchaser confirms that he has got the product that he has ordered for. So that's how Alipay came. And then, suddenly there were lots of, complaints that in Taobao, anyone and everyone is basically selling off even the knockoffs. So that landed, by these guys into trouble, Taobao into trouble. And so therefore, then he said that, no, we need to do something. So then he graduated to what is known as the Tmall. The Tmall is something where, even the branded, companies like Adidas and Nike who are operating in China, instead of having their own website, they started basically contracting with these guys so that, they come and in Tmall, there is a certain assurance of quality, and that's how that problem was solved. So Tmall came about. Then Jack Ma later realized that I can expand some more, and so therefore he said that the Chinese, he observed that the Chinese are getting very little interest from the savings that they are parking in the banks in China, state banks in China. So therefore, he said that I will come up with those kind of schemes where I will give a higher rate of interest. And then, so therefore, this is how he challenged the banking system itself. And over a period of time, the banking reforms took place in China because of this kind of a push. So these kind of innovative product, and so therefore, very soon, Alipay got rivaled with, the super app, which is called, the WeChat. So what I will do is I'll take a short, break here, and I'll basically show you a short video which will tell you about, how Chinese innovation took place in this particular, arena. So what I'll do is I'll play a certain video which you can see, and just hold on. Yeah. There seems to be something wrong. Yeah. Can you all see now? I think you're not able to get the audio, right?
Yes, we don't.
Yeah, yeah.
No
So
audio.
anyway, I'm sorry, so I think something wrong with, the audio there. But anyway, let us get on with this particular, where I was earlier. So, so the role of Chinese government, I was talking about, the role of Chinese government is has been very, very critical, as I was trying to emphasize earlier. Uh, you see, one of the major bones of contention as far as the Sino-US, trade war, in which technology is the most critical component, is basically this whole contentious issue of China's industrial policy to boost technology innovation. Now, it is very much expected that governments, basically, especially command economies, use industrial policy to boost, various business activities. And in this, and there are two kinds of innovation that we talk about. We talk about original innovation and imitating innovation. Now, the US basically has accused China, and that is one of the most important things that we need to understand. It has accused China of, devising a certain kind of industrial policy whereby it has led to lack of a level playing field between Chinese players themselves and the foreign players operating in China. So therefore, Chinese state has been encouraging its players, its local players, to innovate, and it has been protecting them from foreign competition. And once it is able to develop a certain product by massively funding many of these innovative products and services, then it plans to basically expand it and export whatever it does in other parts of the world. Now, that's something which the Americans have always been very much angry about, annoyed about. Now we will talk about this and we'll touch upon this topic a bit later. But coming back to the role of Chinese government. So the domestic policy, we have a domestic policy, and first I would touch upon 2 or 3 points here, and then I would go to the external policy. If you look at the domestic policy, mass innovation and mass entrepreneurship, this is something which Li Keqiang, the Chinese Prime Minister, spoke about in 2014 in the summer Davos in this city called Tianjin, close to Beijing, 120 kilometers away from there. So that was a very, very important event which the world did not notice, but it led on to a certain kind of flurry of activity. And till then, the Chinese society is very much like our society, where the kids are having enormous pressure to succeed. After their +2, they have an exam which is called Gaokao, just like our JEE entrance. So one child policy, now it's no more there, but it led to a lot of pressure on kids to perform. So the idea was, to get a job, very good job, get into Peking University, Tsinghua University, get into a Google or an Apple, buy a house, buy a good car, etc., etc. But So in a society, entrepreneurship was not something which was not encouraged. But the moment in a hierarchical society, Confucian society like China, the government comes in and says that, innovation is in, suddenly, the rules of the game change. So that led to a frenzy of activity. And it led to, subsidizing tech entrepreneurship. It led to calls by the state council to attract private venture capital funds, to create thousands of tech incubators, create entrepreneurship zones. And in China, you see the system of cadre promotion is such that once there is a signaling from the center, everyone has to follow. So the provincial and sub-provincial officials also got into the act. So there was a frenzy. And this is how, an ecosystem was developed, which is conducive to innovation. Second is, and another very important event that happened was, the Made in China 2025. The Made in China 2025 10-year plan, and it's, according to this plan, the government strives to make China a global powerhouse. The aim is basically to reduce external reliance and create Chinese companies to compete locally and globally. So this is something I was, talking about. See, you see, whether it is uh, protecting Chinese local players, or whether it is talking about, very, very protective about something like the rare earth metals, which China has possession of. So it has what is called two markets, two resources approach. It means that two markets, two resources means my domestic market and my domestic resource is one thing, and the external market and external resources are different. So on one hand, I will be highly, highly protective about my rare earth materials, and I will not export it whether I need it today or not, and I will use this to my advantage to choke my rivals and adversaries in the future. And simultaneously, I would also basically look and explore for new markets, say for example, markets in Africa, Central Asia, which are very rich in mineral resources. And I would like to basically take their possession through political aid and by different means like BRI and all, and, use that to my advantage so that tomorrow I can, use it the way I want, and I can also dictate who is going to get access to this and who is not going to get access to this. Right. So this is what is, the rationale for Made in China 2025 can be explained like this. So the idea behind Made in China is also to integrate with global manufacturing chains and cooperate with industrialized economies. How they seek to achieve this, by regulatory changes. So for example, they are setting targets to increase R&D for companies, and they are saying that we are going to give you loans, we are going to give you subsidies if you are going to reduce energy and water consumption. If you are going to, so it has increased the limits for investment on R&D, and said that if you invest R&D, I will support you more. So it has led to building up of 40 national innovation centers and 48 provincial innovation centers. It has set up a semiconductor fund for Xiaomi. And if you look at the events which has happened recently, 1 week back, the 5th plenum of the 19th Central Committee meeting, which just, the 4-day meeting just got over, what was stressed was, quote unquote, technology self-reliance. You must gain initiative in global technological revolution. Technology self-reliance as a strategic pillar of national development. So these are the ones which basically has led to a very active play. And we should not underestimate the importance of the government for the simple reason that how suddenly it is an authoritarian system like China has certain advantage. Suddenly it will, ban, petrol vehicles. It will ban those, models of automobiles which run on internal combustion engines, and they will see, and that suddenly basically makes way for an ecosystem which will help development of electric vehicles, right? So these are some of the things which, it has been doing internally. Of course, the story is very long, but I just touched upon some of the important points. Now, if you look at the external part of it, if you look at role of the Chinese government on the external front, we all have heard about the Belt and Road Initiative, But what not many have heard is there is also a third pillar. So the belt is basically the land, and the road is basically the sea part of it, the marine part of it. And the third part is the digital Silk Route. The digital Silk Route was actually spoken not in a as high a tone as the other two pillars, but it started off in 2015 itself. The goals of digital Silk Route are focusing on digital payments and 5G, plans to invest 180 billion US dollars in creating 5G infrastructure in next 7 years. And this is to be developed by top three SOEs, namely China Mobile, China Unicom, and China Telecom. This is not a very small event because it is going to give opportunity to China to popularize Chinese 5G standards, boost the competitiveness of Chinese players versus top US players in over-the-top services, which is called OTT services, increase China's transnational undersea cable projects. So for example, when the world was dealing with COVID, China in Feb 2020, this year itself, Huawei Marine Networks, it has laid down 37,000 miles of undersea cables. Now with this, in 2012, China's position of undersea cables was somewhere around 12%, but after with this, it has increased to 20% now. So therefore, many of the players in like US and other allies are looking this as major threat. That is the digital Silk Route. Why is this considered a threat? Because there's no Western firms and policymakers are involved in this whole thing. They're not even allowed to. Data traffic monitoring within China is going to increase, and it's going to lead to those kind of those kind of monitoring which might violate some of the basic things. What is the impact of these kind of developments? That is something we will discuss in the next section. So therefore, what is the impact of the Sino-US technology war? What is the impact of this whole what's going to be the impact of China's evolution as a tech powerhouse? If you're talking about impact, this whole story is you can't even talk about this story without mentioning about Sino-US tech war. So China has, according to US, and I mentioned about it, it has made a very shrewd use of socialist market economy. That means that being an authoritarian state and having a market economy and still, having adequate space for the state, it has very shrewdly used industrial policy to boost a certain kind of, policies and strategies whereby it can push its investment on technology. And many of this, are based on imitation. They're not original innovation. And the US has alleged that it is based on stealing and violation of IPR, etc., etc. And many times, because it has a huge market size, it has arm twisted American firms and others to get into JVs, joint ventures. So therefore, this is one of the most significant part of the story as far as the Sino-US tech war is concerned. So efforts have been made to prevent foreign dominance in technologies in areas which are basically of key significance. So there's a small typo here. I'm sorry. China has gone beyond the traditional protectionist instruments by constantly changing rules related to local content requirements. It has subsidized loans for local firms. China's state-directed industrial policy in the form of Made in China 2025 has harmed US interests, mainly in the high tech. So the US has retaliated. Adoption of Foreign Investment Risk Review Modernization Act, expand the review of Chinese investment. I stands for investment there in US tech sector. It has expanded the list of Chinese firms who won't be exported sensitive technology by US firms, like export of chips. Ban on Huawei United States to export the technology which it has developed in US to China. So therefore, Huawei is, the main parent company is in China. So Huawei US is the American subsidiary. So the American government has come up with rules for Huawei United States, that is the subsidiary of Huawei in United States. It has banned it from exporting technology which is developed in United States to China. It has also threatened with new measures to, it has also threatened that, all its trading partners by saying that it will come up with new measures to penalize them if they trade with China. And then, we all have seen how because of COVID and later further escalation of Sino-US rivalry trade war, the Trump administration also took measures which led to delisting of Chinese firms in American stock exchanges. So here I am actually, at the risk of being digressive, very enticed actually to introduce this concept of weaponized interdependence. The world for, in the last 30 years or so, in the liberal international economic order has been seeing, it's a world of complex interdependence. So global supply chains is the best example. So you have a certain product, say for something like Apple, Apple's iPhone, it has so many components which are manufactured in different parts of the world. And finally, the real assembly takes place in China. But so it is designed in US, manufactured in China. And in fact, the global supply chains have become so complicated that many intermediaries don't even know where a product has come from to further improvise on their part of the job. So this, international liberal economic order had, was characterized by a certain kind of neutrality of the international financial system. However, in the wake of the, the WTC attack, the terror attack in New York, US suddenly was rattled, and so therefore it challenged the neutrality of the international financial system. First, it started basically on terrorism, then it went on to talk about organized crime, and then nuclear, nuclear proliferation. So therefore, in other words, US has used its monopoly over the international financial system because the dollar payment, has to be done in the American territory via American banking system through the SWIFT code. So therefore, it has used that power to choke whatever it doesn't like, whether it is its friends or whether it is its adversaries. So Farrell and Newman, two political scientists, came up with this concept of how America weaponized this interdependence. So since 2008, US has fined European banks $22 billion for doing business with parties which it didn't approve of. Since 2019, new sanctions targets have increased by 82 times, according to Gibson Dunn, a legal firm. So the question is, when I talk about relevance of China's emergence as a tech superpower, now the fear is that is China going to become increasingly powerful, and it will also be in a position to, because it is so much a part of the global supply chains, over a period of time it can also weaponize this kind of an interdependence. And we are already seeing, possibilities of that. So, for example, if you look at, something like logging, the full form is National Logistics Information Platform. This is supposed to be a single window platform for information on international logistics, covering land, air, water, everything. Currently, it is limited to maritime domain. The idea is basically to connect companies' infrastructure like ports, aggregate information on goods movement, packing and unloading of goods. So this is something like a Facebook where, you aggregate all the information. Not only that, you can further build upon new applications on this kind of a thing where you will be able to further monitor what's happening in ports in different parts of the world. Now, this is something which the world has not seen, and suddenly China gets in here and it establishes a certain kind of precedence which will lead to technical standards for information logistics. It's also going to become very influential in shaping information environment regarding this. So therefore, what kind of goods are going, what kind of, which port is exporting what, blah, blah, blah. So this is going to be something which, is going to be a big thing. And it is going to definitely weaponize, it's going to be a major tool, weapon in the hands of Chinese. If you look at now, what is the impact of all this? If you look at, I would like to look at the impact, just touch upon some of these things. Maybe in question and answer, we can, if time allows, we can expand on them. But there is global impact, and then, let us also try to look some impact with focus on emerging markets and like India. So if you look at the global impact, impact on innovation in developed markets. So I started off by saying that how Chinese innovative practices have led to innovative practices have been motored by certain kind of state capitalism, and how even American officials, like senior officials, like William Barr is basically talking about, a Chinese kind of a state capitalism. So that is the kind of impact which China has. Increasingly, the Trump critics have said that you cannot win a war, a trade war or a tech war by stopping your adversary from growing. What you need to focus is on what is it that you are going to do so that you're going to outstrip your adversary. That is the way to go about it. But right now, the way China has gone about in such a short span of time, it has rattled many of many of the establishments, and so therefore many of the reactions seem to be more reactive rather than proactive. Whereas if you look at the ground reality, whether there is a debate whether Chinese imports of tech imports to some of the Western markets, has it helped those markets in upgrading technologically, or it has not? If you look at Europe, data 2000 to 2007, 15%, it is said that 15% of the tech upgrade in Europe has actually taken place because of the stiff competition that has come from Chinese imports. Similarly, if you look at US, initially, data said that the Chinese tech imports in the American market have actually led to lowering down of R&D expenses there, and there has been a dip in patents, filing of patents by US players. But however, an IMF report says that later in the last few years, one has seen increase in high quality patents. However, what has happened is that the investment in R&D has become more focused now. Instead of investing in also rans, it's a very focused, very determined, and very with a very high degree of due diligence, R&D expenses are happening. That is so now if you look at China's progress in artificial intelligence, it is also going to have a major impact on values and governance. So for example, face recognition, artificial intelligence. So all these things basically, big data. So whatever China is exporting in terms, especially in BRI markets, products and services, and those countries which are semi-authoritarian and authoritarian regimes, whenever it is selling these products and services and training their public personnel, it is also training them on how to use this big data to curtail individual freedom and privacy. Similarly, some of its algorithms, advanced algorithms called the black box algorithms, which talk about facial recognition technology and all, they have the danger of bracketing someone who is a criminal as a lifelong criminal. So therefore, if by facial recognition, if some criminal with someone with a criminal past, is residing in a certain area now after serving his prison sentence, and there is a crime in a particular area, then invariably, the person who is going to be suspected of as this particular criminal. So this is the kind of system that one might see, and this is something which is going to have new questions on ethics and governance practices. Similarly, if you look at mobile payments, for example, in the BRI markets, Alipay, WeChat, in the BRI markets, so for example, if a certain customer is paying, a certain kind of for certain kind of a product in Kenya, and he's using a product B2B or B2C by making payments here via Alipay and WeChat, the data comes back to China. So it is possible that over a period of time, the payments, the data that, regarding Kenyan customer behavior, uh, Alibaba and Tencent have a better idea than some of the local market players, in Kenya itself. So that is something which is going to be, the markets are going to deal with. But however, it is said that, this mobile payments is, very shortly it's going to be taken over, which I'll speak in my next slide, is, the digital currency. Another impact is, the kind of innovative products that Alibaba and others are coming with. It is believed that, they are more leading to a world which is more of a tech fin world rather than fintech world. What do you mean by this? We mean is, as the, some of these products, Chinese products are going to BRI markets and other markets, there are, in the whole world, there are some 1.74 billion unbanked population. So therefore, mobile payments, giving access to mobile payments and then getting access to data is, so therefore, financial inclusion is something which is going to, be another part of the story. Now, if you look at, the maritime security route, which I was talking about, and digital Silk Route, if you look at the sea lanes, open communication, the 2/3 of global trade, they go through Chinese-owned ports. In fact, 34 out of 42 ports in Africa and Eurasia are owned by 2 Chinese state-owned enterprises. So there seems, so therefore, whatever is happening in different ports with this, digital Silk Route kind of an infrastructure, maritime security route, this fusion is going to give China a very, very major strategic advantage to monitor what is happening in many of these ports. Coming to talk about, emerging markets like India, the word FANGS, by the way, I've come across this word in The Economist. It stands for Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google. So that is FANGS. And BATS is basically Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent. So if you look, so, whether it is United States or whether it is China, whether it's a democratic system or an authoritarian system, none of them would like to have, such players becoming so dominant in their own market. So therefore, they would be looking for foreign markets, and emerging markets are highly lucrative. So for example, Amazon aims to increase sales value on platforms abroad by 50% by 2025. It plans to spend more than $5 billion to replicate offerings in India. Google, more than half of Google's revenues are from outside United States. Facebook, 8 out of 10 of FB's biggest territories are from emerging markets. Now, if you look at the Chinese, products, the BATS, basically Chinese companies, the BATS ecosystem is integrated with more than 1,000 foreign firms, including dozens in emerging markets. And they are also big in terms of, funding as venture capitalists. In India, in very short time, they have become the 3rd largest source of, funding in terms of venture capital. Recently, because of the border skirmishes, new developments have happened. But however, although in terms of numbers, the Chinese players may not suffer that much. However, recent bans are, are bound to cut access for these firms towards the most lucrative market in the tech space, and Chinese tech players in the long run are bound to lose. Now, China's emergence as a tech player will be incomplete if I don't mention about China's plans to launch, digital currency, electronic payment. So the Chinese government has decided to use central bank digital currency in the form of DCEP, that is digital currency and electronic payment. So China stands, to be in advantageous position because 86% of Chinese customers are already familiar with mobile payments. So there is a smooth transit there from one system to another. What are the gains from this? It is likely to boost internationalization of RMB. DCP-EP is expected to operate without a bank account and internet access. So financial inclusion, it is believed that, till 2017, many of the senior citizens in sizable sections do not have banking access. So therefore, DCEP is going to lead to financial inclusion and boost e-commerce, which is already worth 2.1 trillion US dollars. However, it is going for an authoritarian system. It comes as a shot in the arm that it's going to enhance government's monitoring of economic activity. It allows, with the monitoring that can happen because of the digital mode, it will allow policymakers to be more nimble and tailor the monetary policies accordingly. As an alternative to SWIFT, the US, transfer, China has launched a cross-border interbank payment system in 2015. Its expertise may help it in helping others to set digital currencies that are interoperable with its own, which means that, it has always said that given its predominant position in the global level, 15% plus of global GDP comes from China, but its financially its stature is not worth much speaking about. So this will help, address that particular, aspect. Now, to conclude, few observations. China's emergence. China has, despite a lot of estrangement between China and US in the last few years, especially post-corona, but we see that in the world of high finance, where there is, especially in China, the technology and finance has come very, very close. China has emerged as a hub of high finance. The Wall Street stage for China reflects the changing center of gravity in finance. And very recently itself, BlackRock, an asset management firm, has set up China Fund Business, and its rival Vanguard has shifted its Asian headquarters to Shanghai. JP Morgan has invested $1 billion to buy control of China's money management venture. So, and with there is a certain kind of, with US and China, having this kind of a wrestling, the world is likely to develop into two rival spheres of influence, and cause balkanization of internet. So China is poised to export its bullet train and nuclear plant prowess in a brief period, exhibiting virtues of state-led development. And the world fears that state capitalism boosted technology is also going to become very, very important weapon. It's going to become indispensable part of GVCs by assembling components. So China's unique ecosystem has inspired innovation and machine learning technologies. So therefore, China poses a very, very interesting and very, very important challenge for all of us. In India, unfortunately, whenever you speak about China, there is a tendency that we like to be in a state of denial. I always say this, that whether it is, if A and B are friends, it's always good to invest on a good friend so that he becomes better and a better friend becomes best. But if you consider someone as an adversary, then all the more reasons to invest knowing your adversary. So by making an effort to know your adversary and having a well-informed understanding, you're not helping the adversary, but you're helping yourself. So therefore, it's very important for us actually to realize the tech prowess of China and encourage debate and discussion, and try to deal with this neighbor of ours, with whom we are very uncomfortable, and it has ambitions, and our rise is definitely linked to how we deal with China. And having a well-informed understanding without looking the other way, without being in a state of denial, are the first few baby steps we'll be taking in this direction. We should know China not because we are doing some benefit to China, but because of our own national interest, and that is what is most important. Now, with this, I stop here, and maybe I have I have crossed my time limit. So I welcome any questions that you have. Yeah. Hello.
So can we just like unmute and ask the question?
Yeah, I am not able to hear you. Can you, speak loudly?
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
So
please.
first question will be about improvement in the defense tech in China. Like I'm especially asking this question with regards to what is happening uh, at our northern borders, and like how will this go ahead? Because again,
What will go ahead? What will go ahead?
the development of defense tech, Chinese defense,
So, sorry?
the development of Chinese defense technology.
No, development of Chinese defense technology. Okay. Yeah.
So what can we really project, or what can we see? Uh, you know, because I'm asking this question especially because of the developments at the northern border, and again, like planes such as Chengdu J-20 coming into light as F-35's ripoff. So how do we see defense technology in China? Basically, that will be my question.
Uh, how do we see defense technology in China? I mean, I'm sorry to say, this is a kind of a no-brainer actually. Many of we know for sure that the kind of investment that has gone on modernization of the PLA, it's not a secret. Everyone knows about it. And that is why, uh, you know, if you look at our government, the way they are dealing with, China question, they are dealing it in a very matured way. Not they know for sure that confrontation, for a period of time is not is not advisable, and so therefore engagement is it's very open, and they have our ministers have said that engagement is the only option. So therefore this doesn't mean that we surrender our national interests. We know for sure this is absolutely a no-brainer in the sense that we know what is the defense prowess of China. Militarily they are very much modernized. What we need to basically understand is we need to have a multi-pronged approach. We cannot take a hawkish approach, but doesn't mean that we compromise on our national interests and compromise on our territorial integrity. So we need to have a mix and match kind of an approach. And I think we also need to understand that strength begets strength. And in the 1980s until early 90s, China always adopted what its former leader Deng Xiaoping called lying low approach. And it's only after they have come, a certain distance that today they are talking about, they have emerged as an economic power. They're talking about, what they call striving for achievement. So every country has to wait for its time. So this doesn't mean that we accept whatever is dished out to us. What I mean to say is that apart from external policies, adequate policies to defend our national interests, come what may, we also need to become internally very strong. And I think whatever little I know of China, uh, I mean, you can negotiate with them only if you negotiate from a position of strength. That is what I would respond. I'm not a defense expert, so therefore I won't be able to give you, details on intermediate range ballistic missiles and intercontinental ballistic missiles, who has how many and what is, who has what kind of submarines, etc. But this is what would be my response to your question.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, welcome. Yeah, Devraj, you wanted to ask something? You have raised your hand.
Yeah. Good evening, Professor Venkat.
Yeah, good evening, Devraj. How are you?
This is Professor Debraj from SPJMR.
Yeah.
Great presentation. So I want to
Yeah.
ask you, one of the aspect is, if you leave aside, last 4 or 5 months, 6 months of, the border issue. So India, requires technology which is relevant for an emerging market like India, which is cost competitive and which is proven. So in that sense, Chinese technology should be more appropriate than having technology from US or Germany, which will be very, very expensive. If we leave out some sensitive defense related technology, so is it not a good thing that India should embrace technology from all around the world, including China, and if it's good for us? So what's your view on that?
Yeah, my view is very simple. That that you cannot escape. So let me tell you this. This is what I respond to. It's not a direct answer to you, but the question is that if we think, and I'm sure the government is not thinking like that, but I'm talking of a common man. If the common man in India thinks that by banning apps, 58 apps or whatever you call, we have showed China their place, then I think something is wrong with our way of thinking. We also tend to use Oppo and Vivo phones, and in those phones we use WhatsApp messages to forward boycott Chinese goods. So this is a very strange in our country actually. So therefore, and if you remember, we cannot pick and choose which areas we will do business with China and which areas we are not going to do business with China. Whether we like it or not, China has become a very, very integral part of global supply chains, and you just cannot, completely isolate it. And so therefore the question is that, should I be in a position, or am I in a position to pick and choose those places in which I would do business and those in which I won't do business? That's impossible. But however, having said this, we need to understand that, something as deadly as, the border skirmish has happened. And so therefore, we need to basically take certain steps for national prestige. So it is good. And the parties are engaging in talks. And so over a period of, I'm sure, sooner or later, when things cool down, there will be a normalization process. So if you remember, in March or April, when China was actually going through COVID and manufacturing took a hit there, APIs, active pharmaceutical ingredients, were not coming. As simple a thing as paracetamol's price increased by 40%. So tomorrow, if China says that, okay, as a retaliatory move, I'm not going to send APIs to you. So then, no. I'm happy with importing APIs, but as far as other bans are concerned, app bans are concerned, I don't want to get into that. That is not possible. It is a short-term thing. I don't know whether it is sustainable or not. But for our own national interests, yes, definitely. See, even if I talk about encouraging local players like, say, Micromax itself via Singapore is going to get components, which are going to be manufactured in China. And they're not going to do a very good job of doing it. So ultimately, the Indian customer is not getting the price, the quality that he's paying for. So how do you look at this? Right? So yeah, you're right. I agree with you. But national security considerations, unfortunately, don't work always, keeping in view some of this obvious, common sense, what appears commonsensical. If common sense would have played such a major role in international affairs, we would not have seen 2 world wars, right? And whatever
Thank
we are
you.
seeing today. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Venkat.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, any other question? Okay, thank you, everyone. Thanks for patient listening. And I wish, we had more time, but unfortunately, time flies, and it's a short time of an hour. And I hope to interact with you in some other platform. Thanks a lot. And
Thank you, Professor Venkat.
good
Thank
night.
you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you and good night to all.